very exciting one for you guys today. Thank you for everyone that joined live and for a very special and long-awaited episode here on Detection Engineering Dispatch. I'm Alex, hosting all of your detection engineering content and bringing you the very latest in the DE space and the hottest of topics and best SMEs in the game like today. So if you enjoy our content and you want to stay in the loop with it, please join us on live here on Zoom bi-weekly, or you can catch the replays on our YouTube channel. Now, today I am joined with none other than the very gentleman that stopped the 2017 WannaCry attack, which was, I want to say, one of the biggest hacks of all time. And if you don't know what the WannaCry attack is, it was like the ransomware that threw a tantrum across the internet, locked up like computers around the world, demanded ransom in Bitcoin, and it spread insanely fast, like nothing like we've ever seen, I guess, at the time. And I have here, it said that it exploited a Windows vulnerability to infect over 200,000 machines in over 150 countries. And Marcus actually had a significant role in that. And quite frankly, saved the in saving the internet. And of course, I know Marcus from I believe a video that I came across of him reacting to Mr. Robot scenes.
Oh yes, the mystery robot reaction video. Yes, I remember that one.
That's how I knew of you. But for those of you that have been living under a rock and don't know Marcus, Marcus is an active content creator, and he's an incredible contributor to our SecOps community, and particularly in the realm of CTI, right? He does a ton of great research and has published a lot of great articles on threat intel and works on a lot of open source projects, makes videos, globally recognized speaker, of course. And we get the honor to have him on Dispatch today. So Marcus, thank you so much for coming on and spending some time with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Now, normally I would ask our guests to introduce themselves, but you don't need that much of an introduction, right? Everybody knows you. But what I will ask you is if you can kick us off and tell us, how you got into the industry, what drew you to the field of CTI, and what keeps you so, I guess, in essence, so good at what you're doing.
Almost saved me from the introduction, but not quite. I am so bad at doing introductions, but yeah. CTI, I think it was mostly through the malware analysis path. Like I was very curious about, mostly at the time it was back when kernel rootkits were a thing. So
Mhm.
I was just super fascinated by how they work. So I sort of fell down the rabbit hole of learning reverse engineering, which sort of is kind of a natural pipeline to CTI because like once you get the malware reverse engineering, then it's like, okay, now I can find IOCs, I can build detection rules. So I kind of started out as like a reverse engineer, primarily focusing on malware, and then somehow along the way fell into a CTI role.
Wow, look at that. Well, we are really honored to have you here. Just so you know, our listeners, to give you an idea, in terms of our demographic of the people that are maybe here on Dispatch, but also that catch the replays and that really make up our Dispatch community. They're largely practitioners at like large American corporations. That's organizations that we at Ambulogic we work with. I'm talking threat intel analysts, detection engineers, so building rules. Like that's like our core DNA. And so we often see kind of these two realms, right? At large organizations, maybe they have really large threat intel groups, and they're the ones that are researching and providing like the requirements for then a detection engineer to go off and build and implement rules and such. But sometimes also we see that that's maybe one person doing both roles. So a detection engineer having to do the threat intel, a role themselves in addition to operationalizing his or her research into the company. So a lot we can learn from you here, being a top dog and doing all of that practice yourself. So what I did was I organized these questions into the threat intelligence life cycle. And I know there's a ton out there, right? But this is the one I think makes the most sense. And what I'm going to do is just go through each phases, right? From all the way from the start to finish in navigating and operationalizing cyber threat intelligence into an organization, and just kind of go back and forth from there. Does that sound all right? So starting with the first phase is really scoping threat intelligence. So the planning, figuring out where to start. Like, how would you say, like, how do you come up where to start? What's usually like the trigger point? Where is the inspo when there's just so much out there?
For me, it would be like some kind of interesting, like either a novel technique or threat actor. Usually for me, it's like the really, really the crazy attacks, like the WannaCries, the Hafniums, anything that just kind of like just hits the news and you're like, wow, I have to look into this.
Yeah.
So for me, that's usually the trigger point. I'll see a new attack and I'll start building capabilities for either detecting, preventing, and then that will usually give me some kind of insight into how this threat actor like operates, what's their MO,
Operates.
like how can we see them in future. Like a lot of the time you'll actually see like very specific techniques to the threat actor, and then you'll catch them again doing something else. You'll be investigating some kind of hack and you'll see that very specific technique and you're like, oh, it's my friends from 3 years ago. So for me, it's mostly not because I chase like big public attacks. It's just that those are usually the most interesting.
Do you find that they're always kind of usually the same things that they're doing? It's just kind of an iteration of pretty much the same thing. I feel like it's the same old tricks,
Like specific actors or just in general?
like the technique.
I've seen some novel ones. Like the Hafnium was interesting because they had MS Exchange 0-day vulnerabilities, which you rarely get to see. Like a lot of threat actors will use 0-day vulnerabilities, but they're very meticulous with them. It'll just be high value target here and there. They don't go like just using them for just whoever. But in this specific attack, they did. They just went, we have a Microsoft Exchange 0-day, and we're just going to spray the entire internet. And that one for me was like, not only was it new and unique, but it was quite unprecedented in the scale. Because typically with nation state threat actors, they do very small targeted attacks. And that was the first time I'd ever seen like a nation state just go, we're just gonna hack everything. We're just gonna spray the entire internet with 0 days, and there's probably not gonna be any consequences. So, like, while I feel like a lot of attacks, yeah, they do follow like the same kind of patterns, that one was one that just really stood out to me, and I was like, I have to look into this.
Yeah, I just think that this is a constant battle. If not every organization will have the time to prioritize what all of these things that they have to do on top of everything they have to do, and so a lot of what we try to help them with is during specifically at Amvalogic is during their time at their onboarding, we do an exercise where we align the organization's unique threat priorities with the relevant data platforms that they have, the feeds that even exist, and then begin to try to be like, okay, well, they operate an organization in this kind of market, right? The try to come up with their profile based on factors like industry, right? The type, the specific actors that may be relevant to that target market, so that we can say, okay, these are the prioritized detection that make the most sense for you, and then they can choose whether they want to deploy it and they can customize it, etc. But what I find that I often struggle with is like APTs and threat actors, and if they're kind of enriched or categorized under a certain industry, like, oh, this is targeting the education sector, right? I think anybody in whatever sector can have pretty shitty security. Like, so I think it's doing us a disservice if CTI is saying, oh, this is only like going after the financial services. Like, have you seen that?
So yeah, like there's a lot of issues with APT categorizations because a lot of the time it's the same teams just doing different things. Like one day they're like, okay, you're tasked with this specific category of system. Like say they're going after universities. But that doesn't mean that that actor is only going to use those techniques against that specific target. A lot of the time they'll get retasked to do something else in like a week or 2 weeks time. So then, as you like correctly pointed out, they'll get boxed into this category of this actor only goes after this, and then a week later it won't be true. They'll be going after something completely different. And a lot of the times, at least personally, the ones I've looked at, it's exactly the same team. Like it's the same team with the same capabilities, sometimes new ones, and they just keep going after different industries as they get retasked or like priorities change. I don't know how exactly they decide who they're targeting and when, but a lot of the time it will just be one or two like major groups who are just going after pretty much anything.
Diving in though, so I have a question for you, Marcus. Chaz Latios here. Whenever you're kind of going through and prioritizing these, certainly it's the ones that are interesting to work on as well. But let's say that you're working on the vendor side and you're partnering with the rest of the team. Does any of the business prioritization come into effect there as well, where they're handing you a list of, hey, these are the biggest risks we think that we've identified that we need to loop back in and make sure that we have detection coverage for, and how do you weave that in, and how do you prioritize that versus the fast moving ones that happen, in the news?
So mostly I don't work on the vendor side. I just kind of work outside. So I'll generate like reports on whichever actors I'm looking at, or I'll generate capabilities, and then people are like free to kind of pull those in if they need them for whatever specific coverage they want. But I've never been like in a position where I'm working like directly under the roof of a business, and they're like, these are our priorities. You need to look for this, and this. Because honestly, I don't know if I could do that kind of work, because it would be sort of, in a lot of cases, for a lot of companies, it's just box checking. Like they don't actually want to write real rules or find real threats. They just want to tick boxes so that their insurance company can be like, yep, okay, they've done everything right. When they get breached, we'll pay out the ransom or whatever other insurance money there is.
To your point though, it's like, if you have to work on the vendor side and for a living from a salary perspective, you want automation and a lot of that to be taken care of for the compliance, just check the box type of stuff. So you can work on the much cooler, interesting use cases that are late breaking, that the type of use cases you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. I was booted off for some reason. Maybe we crowded the WebEx, but thank you for sharing that. Phase two, and thank you, Chad, for your question. Phase two, the collection piece of it. So once we've kind of prioritized efforts, right, really scooping up the goods during this phase, right, where we have to, we've identified what we have to do, and the collection of raw data begins now. I imagine if you're at an organization, right, there's all sorts of dedicated threat intelligence platforms out there, so you can go scoop it up there. But it makes it challenging because there's so many different formats that this data may exist in, right? Structured, unstructured, and if they're even relevant. So Marcus, like you'll hear it today here first, Marcus verified, like what are your go-to sources, like grade A, top-notch, like assets where you trust to gather your information about CTI and answer like your requirements really that you're looking to fulfill?
I don't know if it classes technically as CTI, because like a lot of the stuff that gets marketed as CTI, it's usually automatically generated. There's like a lot of false positives. But one of the things I really like is platforms like VirusTotal or like online sandboxes, where they run the malware and then they kind of monitor what it does, and they'll generate a list of it can be IOCs, it can be not IOCs, but a lot of the times what will happen is I'll get given an IOC and it's not enough to really go off of. It'll be like something like, oh, we have this one IP address, or we have this one registry key. And a lot of the time, what'll happen is someone has run that exact same sample in VirusTotal or some kind of online sandbox, and I go and I search that IP in the sandbox, and I can usually find the exact threat that this was tied to. And I found that like hugely useful for just taking like a semi-useless IOC, which would not be enough to like either catch an actor or know that a system has been breached, and turn it into, hey, here's a huge list of IOCs. There's like 12 different paths that you could check if your system was breached. And then I think another one I really like is passive DNS, because a lot of threat intel is very delayed, especially when it comes to threat intel vendors, because they usually don't like burning like active operations. Like if they're monitoring an actor, they will usually prefer to like monitor that actor until they've either stopped doing what it is they're doing, or all of their infrastructure has been burned, and then they release a public report. Of course, they have like high quality like internal reports that go to their customers. But if you're not a customer and you're just reading like their public blog, a lot of that stuff only comes out once the infrastructure is already like burned and the operation is over. And a lot of the time, what you can do is you can like run a DNS or an IP into passive DNS, and you can see, okay, what other IPs has this domain pointed to, or what other domains has this IP been pointed to? And you can kind of pivot off that and actually find still active infrastructure based on some like outdated burned like threat intel report, which I've always found to be super, super helpful.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge because these IOCs only like remain hot for so long, and so it comes down to, well, how do we maximize like their relevance and their time, and how do we, and with all of these different systems that we may have inside of the organization, like that takes a lot of resources, not only compute wise, but the teams to run it against their data sets. I find that this is one of the challenges that our I know our listeners deal with in their day to day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and AI. So of course we want to talk about AI, and I know there's a lot of tech out there that can really help in that regard. Like there's putting these data feeds into your SIM or into your SOAR to help with that supplied IOC list. But like you said, it's none all of these are not all of it is going to be good, or it's going to be outdated. So do you have like a criteria for what good looks like? Because we obviously want good quality consumption.
Um, like, are we saying like what a good IOC is versus like not a good IOC, or
That's
just a
right.
good feed?
Yeah, that's right.
So IOC wise is very tricky because they're just so contextual. Like an example I would give is like the IP address. Everyone loves IP address.
Mhm.
But an IP address could be, this is the threat actor's control server. They might have this around for like a couple of months, a couple of years. It's a pretty consistent IOC. It's like if something is talking to this dedicated threat actor server, then it's probably malware. But then you'll get some malware that uses proxy networks or hacked websites or hacked routers, or like it could be anything, or like some AWS VPS they spin up for like a day. And then when you use that kind of IP as if it were some static threat actor C2, like not only do you get a lot of noise, but you get a lot of false positives. Because what will happen is the actors will rotate IPs out on like, I've seen it as fast as like on a minutely basis. Like they're spinning up new boxes and tearing them down like every couple of minutes. And if
Mhm.
you take one of those IP addresses and you plug it into your CTI feed as if it were a static threat actor C2, now suddenly you're not only missing actual like detections, but you're probably going to get a lot of false positives because that IP is going to get recycled by the cloud provider. It's going to end up on someone's real website, and then someone's going to go to the website, and you can be like, okay, we're infected with malware. So it a lot of it comes down to like a human analyst actually has to look at how is this threat using these IOCs, like how do they, like what is the context in which they tie to this specific threat, because it can
Yeah.
vary wildly. Like I've seen command and control servers that have been up for like 10 years, and you could have plugged that IP into your firewall 10 years ago and you would be safe from that threat for 10 years. And then I've seen others where it's like the IPs are changing so fast that if you were to even try and make firewall rules for them, your firewall would just crash. Like it just could not handle the volume of churn. So I think it's like a very, very contextual thing. And you've got to
Yeah.
look at not just the type of IOC, but how that specific type of IOC is
It's
used
used.
in that concept.
Absolutely. We have a question from the audience. Brandon, would you like to ask Marcus?
Yes. So, Marcus, you hit on exactly, so give you just a brief, I spent many years before moving over to industry in national security, DoD, intel space. And your description around atomic IOCs is excellent in terms of the fact that like they've got a limited lifespan and everything else. And you've started pivoting towards the more behavioral piece, right? Which is most adversaries may not be reusing the atomic IOCs, but their TTPs aren't going to change greatly based on who they're targeting or how they're targeting because they work with what's effective, right? What I guess this is kind of a two-parter. The first is, what sources do you recommend, or where do you recommend for finding, relevant and accurate, given that attribution can be such a problem, TTPs? And then, you brought the human analyst into it, but is there a methodology or a capability that you would suggest around taking those TTPs and being able to apply them into technical capacity for building detection?
I mean, I'm sure there is. It's definitely not my skill set. Like a lot of the EDR companies do that. They have, I wouldn't say generative AI, but some kind of machine learning algorithm that goes and it grabs like all of these TTPs and it puts them into dynamic rules that can trigger based on behavior. But in my kind of case, in like my sense, I'm just like one guy, and usually like I'm the one generating the report. So I wouldn't say I have like a lot of experience with taking those kind of behavioral IOCs and turning them into detections at scale. But I think you're definitely correct with like that is the route you want to be going, because like IPs they change, hashes they change. Pretty much any external indicator is gonna just be constantly in flux. But when it comes to techniques, they are really quite slow to change them. Like even the like high end nation state threat actors, they're just they'll keep on a technique until it's absolutely burned, and then they might switch over, and that's usually I'd say up to like years. So yeah, I would say that like behavioral detections is the way to go, but with like how do we generate those at scale, that's not something I really have the skills with.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you
Thanks
for
for the
sharing.
question.
Yeah, of course. We can move on over to phase 3. We've got threat intel processing. Now, when it comes to, now that you've collected, and when it comes to processing and transforming, the raw data into information or in your analysis, right? Do you often have to play with a lot of data when you're normalizing it or cleaning it up and really dissecting it? Do you have any tools that you use to help you do this kind of thing?
So I'm kind of lucky in that I don't have to deal with that side of things. I rarely have to touch the data after it's been generated. Like my
Oh,
job is typically I make the sensors, I harvest like the CTI data, I throw it
mhm.
into some kind of database or Elasticsearch or something like that, and then
Uh-huh.
it's someone else's job to make sense of it all.
I see.
Which I think is lucky because like
That is lucky.
I'm very not like a data analyst kind of mindset. I'm very good at like reverse engineering things and pulling things apart, but when it comes to like building algorithms and stuff, I'm hopeless.
I wouldn't say that. But obviously big aspect there in terms of operationalizing the data. When it comes to dissemination and doing the actual intelligence work, then I think this is really where our a lot of our listeners who are intel analysts and their detection engineers, this is like kind of the space that they play, and how to put it back into their company in a way that operationalizes rules. Now I always like to ask, like, is there any IOC work that is just not worth the effort in this case to do? Because it's just the outcome. Oh man, I'm making a good name for Chicago here with the ambulance coming through now for the third time. Um, but yeah, is there like anything that's just not worth the effort because it'll take too much to analyze and for the value?
I would say it's so case dependent, but I get burned all the time by the opposite, right? It's like I have like a piece of malware and it's generating all of this data, and I look at the data it's generating and I think, oh, this would be useful, this would be useful, and this would be useful. So I push those three useful things to the database and I drop the rest.
Mhm.
And then fast forward 6 months and I'm like, oh, you know what would be really useful? That piece of data that I didn't log. So I like to kind of lean towards you should gather all the data, but maybe some of the data isn't worth like either making rules off of or uh doing advanced processing, but it should be there because the amount of times I have not gathered a piece of data because I thought at the time it was worthless, and maybe it was worthless at the time, but
Uh-huh.
then 6 months down the line, I'm like, oh, this would have been really, really useful. So I think I could probably come up with a list of like 1,000 things that might not necessarily be worth analyzing. But when it comes to like actually like gathering the data, I just say gather everything and analyze what's relevant at the time.
Yeah, I think that's spot on there. Now, in terms of also on the analysis piece, I would wanted to share because once upon it and to help analyze, I guess, the data. Once upon a time, I worked a few years ago with a tool called I2. And we worked with a company that was like a large bank, and it was honestly really incredible. It was like a link analysis tool that could stitch together large data sets of transactions, like the from to relationships, like who owns a certain account, and who that account is sending money to another account like Venmo. And we would overlay that with Venmo accounts, and it would pretty much be smart enough to overlay like the same line items, what you see in Excel, but over just an entity, so you can really follow like the money, which accounts were maybe potentially mule accounts, who was sending small payments like to people every single a certain time at a certain day, and it was really awesome to see that route. But now, like with the amount of data that's out there, I'm very sure like that tool would not handle, like, because that would only handle like Excel sheets. With the amount of data that's out there now, it's I don't know, like, do you think like analysts can keep up with being able to visualize and analyze data like fast enough to keep up with like its generating speed? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I guess it depends on the team size because I know there's like some really, really big teams who have like their own like in-house developers to write
Yeah.
like custom software to like help in the analysis. But I would say for like most organizations, that's not the case, right? It's like most organizations, there is way more data than they could ever possibly process.
Yeah.
And I think that's where like those kind of providers come in, the people who they just focus on like a specialized type of data. So you can have your feed for like Venmo payments or like detecting mules, and you can have your feed for domain ratings. And I think it's like the more you kind of, I don't want to say as a service, but it is kind of like the everything as a service. But the more
Mm.
you like fragment it and have people specialize in like just their own silos, I think the better quality the data get. Because like I've
Yeah.
been the one
Best of
who's
breed.
yeah, I've been the one who's tried to like, let's just take all the data and make something of it, and it
Yeah.
never worked.
Right. Yeah. And not everyone, you're right. I mean, that's absolutely true. Not everyone will have the skills, budget, money to just do it in house, right? Or have all the data scientists in the world to help you do this kind of work. And also, I mean, I know this is the topic of this episode, but we kind of moved beyond just IOC work, right? Like we have to do more of the behavioral analysis route. Like you talk a lot about also toolkits. Maybe, is there any practical ways that maybe we don't have to go the route of the IOC, or is there any other types of analysis within this realm of CTI that we could incorporate into like our daily projects and our daily operations?
Are we classing behavioral analysis as
Behavioral analysis,
like
yeah,
as part of IOCs or as separate?
as separate.
Okay, because yeah, 100% like I'm big on the behavioral analysis. Like that's always been like the IOCs they change, but the
Yeah.
behavior is a lot more static. And that's obviously what like most of the EDR and the XDR and whatever DR companies are doing is they're just logging behavior signals from systems. They're putting them all into some big database somewhere, and then they're matching them against like known threat actor capabilities. And I think like as far as kind of what we have currently, like the technology we have currently, I think that is the best way to go. It's the just have some kind of sensor on each endpoint that logs as much as you can, and it gets fed into a database somewhere where you can then match that against whatever threat actors you're looking for.
Awesome. Almost done here. The phase 5, the threat intel dissemination. Now, during this part, and you say that you're writing reports all the time, communicating relevant threat intelligence to who needs to hear the information, right? Maybe to a business unit. In your case, to your community. To be able to derive value from it, right? And do what they need to do with it, right? The delivery here is to represent the importance, right? So that in the case of our case here is to show that budget and money flows to the security budget to address this concern, right? And reporting is not always the sexiest of things, I guess, to read through. It's very time consuming, it's very manual, it's hard to digest, but I really love the way like you communicate content
Thank you.
and share your reports. And that's why a lot of people want to listen to you. Now, is there any like best practices that you can share to how to best do this, how to communicate threat intel or something so that somebody wants to give a crap about it?
Um, I think for me, it's like you've got to focus on like not just like explaining why this is relevant, but who it's relevant to. Because like
Hmm.
I see one of the biggest mistakes I see constantly is when it comes to like CVEs. Everyone's like, oh my God, there's 9 point whatever CVE, patch your systems now. And it's like anyone who was going to patch their systems has patched their system. Like no one is sat on LinkedIn waiting for a little bubble that says patch now, and they're like, okay, I'll go patch the systems. And it's like it's just such useless advice. It's like
Yeah, it
you need
is.
to say, okay, here is why you need to like, because a lot of companies either they'll automatically roll out patches, but they'll wait like a couple of weeks. They'll have auto update disabled, and then they'll roll out a patch like a couple of test systems, make sure it's working, and then if it's working, they'll then roll it out to the rest of the business. And sometimes there are vulnerabilities where it's so urgent that you need to convince them to skip that process. It's like, you know what? I'm always a big fan of testing things before you deploy to production, but in this case, maybe don't, because the outcome is going to be way, way worse. And you have
Yeah.
to make that case. You have to make the business case for, hey, this update could brick all of your systems, but the alternative is going to cost you a lot more. And I
Mhm.
never ever see people doing that. And it's not just with like CVEs, in all cases, all threat actors, they publish like this huge, very detailed, very beautiful report on what a threat actor is doing, and they completely skip the why does this matter to you. And I think that's what you've got to focus on before you even start writing the report. You need to think, how do I like explain to like, probably it's going to be like a business executive, not someone who's necessarily hugely technical. I have to
Mhm.
explain, why do they care about this report?
Yeah, no, I agree though. I love this woman, Christina Murillo. I think she's like a security, she's a high up security leader. I don't not the CISO, but for the New York Giants, the football team. And she posted recently about how security is so unserious until it is.
Yeah, I had this discussion with like a couple of EDR and MDR companies,
Mhm.
and like some things I've actually seen like a lot of vendors do now is they have two versions of their threat intel report. They have the cool spicy one with all the techniques and all the like zero-day exploits for
Mhm.
the technical people, because that's who really gets your report off the ground. Like the people who most want to read these kind of reports are the analysts, but they're not going to be the ones who are convincing the management we need to take this threat seriously. So then they'll
Yeah.
release a second version of the report that's attached to the technical report that's more like targeted at like the CISOs or like the higher level VPs within the company.
Mhm.
That's less like they don't even talk about like the technical aspects behind. They give them here's the why this matters. And I've always thought that was the best kind of way to approach that.
Yeah, no, why it matters now, and what is it typically a one pager? I was
Yeah.
just telling, I was just talking to my leader. She's like, if we had to say every time somebody asked us for a one pager, like
Yeah,
all
like
the time.
I mean, you really do, especially for like the executives. You like a good one pager is way more convincing than the best technical analysis.
Yeah.
But the best thing to do is attach them, because that's what I see like a lot of companies do now. And what will happen is you'll have to like go off to some link that's behind like some kind of, not a paywall, but there's like extra steps to get to the link to the technical report. So they can't
Yeah.
directly share the technical report. They can only share like the blog post that has like the one pager and then a link at the bottom to go and get the technical report. And then you get all the analysts who are like really interested in the technical report sharing your one pager for executives.
Yeah. And you know what? And God forbid that, let's say the stakeholder doesn't want to do anything about it and something happens, writing down all this information, your extended report, your one pager, there's a paper trail. Like that you tried to bring this to their attention, right? Nothing was done.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So last but not least, feedback. I always like to ask, and I made a compilation video of this at Black Hat this year, and I had the best stories. So Marcus, do you, before I ask you about WannaCry, because we all want to know about that story, do you have like a Roman Empire of a CTI or like a hack or a moment or an experience that you're constantly thinking about? It's like your Roman Empire, and maybe even has like kind of shaped your influencer personality.
I feel like it is also WannaCry because that was the
Of
one that just
course.
had the single biggest impact on my
Yeah.
life,
Yeah.
but not discussing that. I would say it was probably either Hafnium or the hack of the DNC because those were both like incredibly highly publicized like political attacks
Yeah.
where there wasn't really that much consequences. And I thought, like, wow, like these people can get away with a lot. Like, where I thought the bar was where your country like gets like, I don't know, like sanctioned into oblivion or invaded or whatever. I think that bar, like in
It's low.
it might not exist. Like, I think there may not be a line that they cannot cross. And I think that's what it like massively changed my outlook of what was possible. Because there was a time when I thought, oh yeah, no, nation state actors wouldn't do this. It would cause a war. And then you have them like, oh, we're just gonna mess with the elections. Like we're gonna try and influence people to vote for certain candidates. We're
Yeah.
gonna spray 0 days at all of your infrastructure. And that was kind of the point where it's like, oh wow, like there really is not that many consequences for this kind of thing. And there is not much incentive for them to stop.
Absolutely. That is that just like gave me the chills to think about. Um, I was
Scary
gonna say
world.
the I was gonna say the colonial pipeline impact, but since you mentioned the election, I mean, we're so close to one, literally in a couple of months, so
Yeah.
that is so relevant.
Although to be
Uh,
fair, Colonial Pipeline, there was a lot of consequences for that one. And it wasn't nation state, it was some Russian criminals. But I don't think they would do that again. Like that was one of the ones where I was like, no, they got kicked exactly as hard as they needed to get kicked.
yeah, no, people are in jail for sure.
Yeah. Well, they're
Yeah.
not even just in jail. I think I may be wrong, but I believe that was the one where they hacked all of their systems and they took not just the money they made from the ransom, but all of the money they had made from all of their ransoms. They just broke in and just took all of their money. So not only did they not make any money from the Colonial Pipeline attack, they lost all of the money they had
Yeah.
saved up. And I was
Oh
like,
my
okay, yeah, they're not doing that again. And
god.
then people went to jail. So it's like, yeah, you kind of lost with that one.
Marcus, I have a quick question. I have to ask this stuff for my kids. So I have an 8-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son, and they're big on YouTube. And so when I told them that I was going to attend this session today, they knew who you were. They have watched a Marcus Hutchins YouTube video, and they're like, "What? Really?" And it's so they're Generation Alpha, and I'm sure we have some parents on this phone right now too. And I'm millennial. I'm sure we have some Gen Xers on this phone. I think, Marcus, are you millennial or are you Gen Z millennial?
I'm very low end millennial.
There you go. Okay. So, in your opinion, like, what is the difference in the skill sets and the different approach to, cybersecurity experts and subject matter experts from like millennial to Gen Z to Gen Alpha? Because I'm just sitting here looking at my kids and the technological advancements that they have at their fingertips, which I know is every single generation, but holy shit, Gen Alpha is wow. So I just want your take on like the different generations and how they approach things differently and what you think it's going to look like in the future.
So I feel like I kind of feel like the technology thing is actually like a double-edged sword
Yeah.
because like one of the things I know personally that got me like really involved in tech was computers just didn't work back then. Like it would just break. Printer broke, monitor broken, RAM, it's caught fire for some reason. And you spent so much of your time like in the weeds of computers. And that like built like quite a lot of like very technical skills. And then the downside now is like a lot of tech just work. Like I've had an iPhone, like I keep all of my old iPhones, right? And I've had some that are like now what I think we're coming up on close to 10 years now, maybe more. I think it was like what 2007 or 8 it was released. And like that thing still works. Like it's never once broken. And as a result, I have no understanding of the internals of like Apple systems because I've never had to fix it. So I've always felt like that kind of shift from nothing works ever to like all of the tech is super stable and rarely breaks makes it a lot harder to build like technical skills personally. But then on the flip side, what it happens is there's like a lot of more people who they will actually just dig into it for the sake of it. And then you get these like industry experts who people like really like they listen to when they say something. And you can like I can name like probably any tech. There is like a couple of people that like when they say something, you listen. And I think like that kind of balances out that like maybe there's like it's a lot harder to develop your own technical ability, especially for certain systems mobile devices. But then when someone talks on mobile devices, the people listen. And I think that's like really great to see. Like you see like a lot of people with like YouTube channels that will like specialize in like a very specific silo of technology. I remember watching some guy who was like an expert in dishwashers. I know nothing about dishwashers. Wouldn't have been something I would see myself interested in. And suddenly I'm watching like an hour-long video on dishwashers and I'm like, wow, I have learned so many new technical skills and so much that will actually help in my daily life from watching a video by a dishwasher expert. And I think that culture, like it, you see it a lot on like TikTok and the platforms that like the younger generations frequent. There's all these people who are like domain experts in like a very specific silo, and they're so engaging that they can just get like anyone in those generations to be interested in anything. And I think there's just so much more knowledge comes out of that.
Yeah, spot on. And my second question is like nature versus nurture.
Yes.
You feel like you were born with it, or do you feel like there's some kind of, parenting situation or childhood situation that shaped you to be this megastar in cybersecurity? Like, were you just born with a glitch in your brain that automatically was like a moth to the flame to this, or what do you think?
I think it was partially my brain just doesn't seem to work right, but it was also like I grew up in an environment that made it possible for me to do that. Like I think my parents bought me my first computer at like 12 or 13 years old. So I think it was a mix of both. Like there's something about my brain that it's like I have to know how this thing works. But a lot of it was I just had the opportunities. Like I spent a lot of time skipping school and my parents kind of didn't push me too hard on that. So I could have been learning like quadratic equations or something I'm never going to use once in my life, or I could be learning computer science. And my parents kind of like gave me the space I needed to learn the stuff that mattered to me. And then, of course, ended up becoming my career.
Thank you.
No, Paloma, Lenny, don't listen to the skipping school part.
Yes, stay in school, kids.
No, I
Stay in school.
Yeah. Looks like we have another question in the chat.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat. But I do want to save the best questions for last because we want to know how the hell you stopped the WannaCry attack in 2017. But question first, we have a question from Josh. No?
Yeah. So earlier we were talking about how like you have to rely on sensors to log everything in order to make your detections and stuff like that. So I just wanted to ask you like, so how do you count when like, so at some point the sensor has to go down, whether it's like if there's a failure or the engineering team has to do like an upgrade or something, then you're gonna have a gap in like the logs that you have. So then you won't be able to see that data to be able to like know if a breach happened. So how do you account for those like moments when like the sensors go down or
Are we talking like endpoint sensors or something like external, like maybe like a network file or like not on the system?
let's say both actually, because like the CrowdStrike could be one, or I was thinking more on the network side, like if you have a Zeek or something running and it has to go down for maintenance or yeah, like a firewall kind of thing. Yes.
I think for anything like external or like network based, there has to be like a rollover, right? There has to be, okay, we're upgrading the firmware on this device. Let's just temporarily roll it over to this one that's either already had the firmware upgraded or is running the last version, and then roll it back. But then like when it comes to like endpoint systems, I think the endpoint has stopped logging is like that's a 5 alarm fire. Like we need to go and investigate that right now. If it's like just an update, then most likely the endpoint is being rebooted. It's being disconnected from the network. There are very few cases in which an endpoint sensor would stop logging, but that system is still active and able to do its job. It's also so rare that an actor isn't likely to wait for that one time when your endpoint logging goes down to breach and then do whatever it is. But you can often contain those scenarios. Like, let's say there is an actor who their MO is we only attack when that person's endpoint protection goes down. How they know this, I don't know, but let's say they do. There's a lot of ways you can do that to make that not possible. Like, we could do a lot of software provides like offline updates, so you can take the machine physically off of the network and then do the upgrade, then plug it back in. But usually I would say if your machine is connected and it's functioning correctly and your endpoint logging just stops, you're going to want to go look at that, because like 9 times out of 10, it's going to be that you have been breached and some threat actors tried to turn off your logging.
We had a rule in QRadar where it was like, oh, if certain logging isn't observed from, and then a reference block of very critical endpoints after a certain amount of time, I want to know about it. If I like hear nothing, and sometimes it was like, oh, it was off for a certain amount of time, and that's okay. But then other times it's like, oh, did somebody turn off logging?
Yeah, because a lot of what the threat actors are doing now is the BYOVD, which is like they'll load a vulnerable kernel driver that's signed. It passes all of the Microsoft requirements. Well, I'm saying Windows specifically because I work with Windows, but like Microsoft has these requirements, like drivers must be signed with certain certificates, and they just won't let them be loaded if they're not. And then, of course, the security tools have like, we're not allowing illegitimate signed drivers. And what they'll do is they'll load a driver that is both signed with the correct certificate and legitimate, but it has a vulnerability. They'll then exploit that vulnerability to get into the kernel, and then they'll turn off the part of the kernel that is responsible for sensor logging, like for the EDR or the XDR or whatever. And like the second that goes off, like that is a bad time, because like not only, well, you should assume that that is what's happened. Like there is a high risk that any top tier threat actor will try and do that. They will try and get into the kernel and just turn off the logging. So I personally see the logging has gone offline as like a very serious, like, we need to go and look at this.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. And last question, because we're coming up at the top of the hour and want to be respectful of your time. I wanted to ask how the hell you stopped the WannaCry attack.
So that was probably the easiest one, because it was at the time that we were doing external monitoring. We would get into botnets and exfiltrate like IOCs that way. And one of the things we would very regularly do is you would have a DGA malware, which they would generate web addresses based on some kind of algorithm. And once you'd reverse engineered the algorithm, you could know what domains they were going to use in the next day, week, month. So I got pretty used to just instinctively, if this domain isn't registered, register it. And it just so happened that WannaCry had the same thing. It had a domain that wasn't registered, but rather than being a command and control server, it was a kill switch. So like I go and I grab that domain, and then later we find out it's a kill switch. So just by activating the domain and pointing it to a server, we can now stop every infection across the entire globe.
And you reverse engineered like the domain generated algorithm by yourself? Like,
well, so this one specifically wasn't an algorithm, but
Oh.
because I was so used to working with domain generation algorithms, it was just second nature to see an unregistered domain and then go and register that domain.
I wonder if you can make a rule to look for all domains that are not registered that hit your network.
I think that's like definitely an important thing to do. Although that kind of malware sort of died out a while back, but like that was kind of a big thing at the time, where it's like if you're seeing like hundreds of NX domain lookups, you're probably infected with DGA malware.
Ooh. And last but not least, Jen, I did not forget about your question, Marcus. What do you like about, or what do you love about the SecOps community, and what would you like to see more of?
I just like the way that there's all of these like social media communities where people just they share their research. Like there's no like you got to like and subscribe and sign up to my Patreon or whatever. People just share cool research. And if you have questions about the research, like a lot of the times you can just reach out to them and they'll help you with whatever problem you're having. And I just love the way that it is actually a community. Like it doesn't matter if they work for rival companies or like this company is like our direct competitor. Everyone's kind of just willing to help each other, and I really like that, and I really want to see more of that.
Absolutely. And with that, we are very excited to promote an upcoming report that we are working on, the voice of the detection engineer. Very, very soon, we're going to go live with that to capture all of the voice of y'all. And as well as we have also an ungated report and from directly from our Anvologic Forge Purple team that curates and researches all of the threat landscape as well, like Marcus. And we also are providing detections for the community on GitHub. So the detection logic for around those threat actors as well. I'll link all of that in the chat. And Marcus, thank you so much for hanging out with us on Dispatch today. I can assure you that this was one of the highest attended episodes this year, and it's kudos to your work and your brand and your contribution to the community. We love what you're doing with it. So keep being amazing. And for the rest of us who joined today, stay tuned for our episode in 2 weeks. We're going to have Rebecca Blair, the author of Aligning Your MITRE ATT&CK to Your Operations. We're going to be talking all about the topic of insider threats, whether malicious or unintentional. Both pose significant risk to the organization, and it's very critical to understand what we can do about it from a detection engineering perspective. So thank you guys all for the time. And Marcus, have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thanks so much for having me, and have a great day.
Bye, everybody. Thank you, Marcus.